Message dialogues add another design surface. These are modal dialogues that require explicit user interaction. I can only ask you that you use these in the rarest of circumstances. In each case, the message dialog will dim the application window and demand a response before continuing. You want to use message dialogs only when the intent is to stop the user and demand a response. A message dialog might look something like this. In this case, we cannot go on until we respond to one of the two buttons on this dialog. We've already discussed pop-ups and how to create them. We saw an example of doing that, but this seems like a good time to go back and discuss them in more detail. A pop-up is a temporary, dismissible UI related to what the user is doing. You might want to confirm an action or show more details. You only want to show them in response to a user tap or click. And you always dismiss a pop-up when the user taps outside of it. If you remember my example before, you had to explicitly dismiss the pop-up, and that's really not a good idea. If you do want to interrupt the user's flow, use a message dialog instead. And a pop-up might look something like this as part of an application. You could click delete photos in this example, or click somewhere else and the whole thing just goes away. Pop-ups show content you don't want on screen all the time. Users open and dismiss pop-ups at any time, so you can't know when they're going to appear. They're used in reaction to things the user does as part of the application. You can use them for collecting information, displaying warnings and confirmations, showing drop-down menus, or providing more info. For example, for collecting information, you might have a pop-up that looks something like this. User clicks a login button. They can then enter a username and a password and click login again, or click outside of it and they won't log in and the pop-up goes away. For warnings and confirmations, you might end up with a pop-up that looks like this. The user clicks the button labeled buy, and a pop-up appears that says your account will be charged blah. Click the button to complete the order, or click somewhere else, or press escape, or just go somewhere else, and you won't complete the order. You might use pop-ups for drop-down menus, and actually this is the pop-up menu object we talked about earlier. Here you can see a pop-up menu in reaction to clicking a button on an app bar. And you might use pop-ups for more info. Here is a hyperlink button control the user clicks on, and when they do, another pop-up appears, and again if they click somewhere else, the pop-up just goes away. You shouldn't use pop-ups for specific things. You shouldn't use them for unexpected messages or for presenting complex or persistent selections of commands, especially if those commands would be more convenient to the user on the app's canvas or on the application's app bar. You want to make the design of your pop-up as simple as possible. A couple of options, a button to make it go. Now, although they're not really pop-ups, they're a separate class, pop-up menu, context menus are similar in usage to pop-ups. They show actions the users can perform on text or other UI elements and can use up to 5 and no more commands on each context menu. You might use cut, copy, open with. And this limit keeps those menus uncluttered. You won't find large, complex context or pop-up menus. And you shouldn't use context menus for your primary command interface because that requires users to know that they have to hover or right-click on a control to make the context menu appear. That's really difficult for many users to know. For the primary command interface, the app bar is what you want to use. And your context menus or pop-up menus might look something like each of these examples. As you've seen earlier in the example from Microsoft, you create a pop-up menu, you add commands to it, and each item on the pop-up menu is a UI command object with text inserted as part of that UI command. A toast is another UI element. Now, it's not like click a drink glass in Toast. A Toast is a UI element that is a little box that appears, and after a certain period of time, it fades away. You can use Toasts as a notification to indicate activity to the user when your app is in the background. Toasts are great for real-time update without requiring your app to be in the foreground. And in general, you have to remember that anything you say in a toast must be okay if the user completely misses that information. If you get a new email, the user hears about it, great. If the user doesn't hear about it, great. If a new item appears on Facebook, you could use a toast to display that as part of an application. And if they miss it, well, too bad. The users can tap on the toast to switch to your app and learn more about whatever caused that toast to appear. Now, using a toast is kind of complicated. The toast object model is provided by the Notifications Extensions Object model library. It isn't a normal control like other controls in XAML. And this Notifications Extensions Object Model Library allows you to supply a tile, a badge, and toast notification XML template contents. So you use the same library for tiles, for badges, and for toasts in your application. For now, I'm only going to discuss toasts. Tiles and badges are slightly outside the scope of this course. This library allows you to do this without having to construct the XML DOM directly. It extracts the work of working with the DOM so you don't have to, just like all the other XAML controls, but there is no XAML control specifically for toasts, and if you didn't have this object model library, you would have to manipulate the XML DOM yourself. So why use this library? You get IntelliSense. There's no need to look things up in the documentation to see how to build the XML that's required for a badge, a tile, or a toast. There's a factory function that creates the objects for you. It creates skeleton notifications. You just fill them in with your own content. The library provides a simplified way to create both square and wide tile versions. You need both because the user always has the option of changing a tile from being wide to not wide. And although we won't create that here, it's nice to know that this library makes that easy, and you should always do it. It provides a simple way to find and fill in text and image attributes on your toast. This Notifications Extensions library is released under the Microsoft Limited Public License, and you can use it easily as part of your application. You can reuse this library, or in a web service, which is pushing notification content out. And you can customize the library if you care to. Now, how do you get the library? You should note that this could change. There might be a better or different way by the time you work with Visual Studio, but for now, the simplest way is to get an application that uses the library and copy it from there. For example, the App Tiles and Badge sample uses the Notifications Extensions library. You download that, and that lives at the link shown here. You unzip the project into a folder. Then open the sample and configure it to build the release version, then build it. Once you do that, you build the extensions library, so then you copy it from the bin/release folder to your new project folder. And you're best putting it in the same folder as the AppX manifest file. Once you open your new project, you can add a reference to that library. In other words, you're just taking the library from one project and adding it to your project and setting a reference to it once it's there in your physical set of files for your project. Now, there is a gotcha, and I didn't know about this, and I spent like an hour trying to get a demo to work. You must also add the capability of using toasts in the AppX manifest file. If you don't, toast will never appear. I spent a long time writing code that should have worked, yet it didn't because I never set this in the AppX manifest file. You must set toast capable to yes. That looks something like this. And if you don't, you'll never see the toasts appear on the screen. Let's take a moment and build our own example that adds toasts and shows off all of the options for the various different ways toasts can look in the standard library. I've created a new blank project, and before I go any farther, I need to add that notifications extensions library. Now, I've already built this, and all I need to do now is add it to my project. So here I need to get this into my project, and to do that, I'll come back to my project, choose Add a Reference, and I can use any of these that I've stored away. I think I'll use this one that I've already built. I'll check it and add it. You could browse to an existing one. That just happened to be one I had built already. Now let me add the markup that will define the UI for this application, and it's a bunch of buttons and text blocks describing what we'll do. And you'll see here that I have 8 buttons because there are 8 different ways. It's not rendering, there we go. Because there are 8 different ways to display a toast. There are 4 without an image, and there are 4 parallel versions with an image. Here, Toast Text 01 displays a single string wrapped across 3 lines of text. Toast Text 02 gives you 1 string of bold text and 1 string of regular text wrapped across the 2 remaining lines. Clearly, you only get 3 lines of text. Toast Text 3 displays 1 string of bold text wrapped across 2 lines and a string of regular text on the 3rd line. Toast Text 4 is a string of bold text on the 1st line and 2 different strings on the 2nd and 3rd lines. The ones with images just parallel the ones you've already seen. And speaking of an image, I'm going to need one here. So let me go to my Assets folder and add an item. Actually, the easiest way to do this is to open up the Explorer window that I've already opened and drag an image over. I have this dog image I'd like to use. So let's add the dog image to my folder. Now we'll be able to display a dog as part of our toast. Let's edit the code for this page and set up some using statements. Here we are. I'm going to add here a few using statements just to make my code easier to type. And you'll notice the notifications extensions.toast content namespace listed here that comes from this reference I added. There's also windows.ui.notifications, which handles all different kinds of notifications. Let me add a procedure which we'll use to display our toast, and we'll examine the code. Let's get the display toast procedure. Here. Display toast works in this way. We create an iToast notification content variable named toastContent and make it be null. We'll add some code here later to define the contents of our toast. Once we're ready to display the toast, we call the createNotification method of our toastContent object and store it away into a variable of type toastNotification. The reason I'm using this iToastNotification content here is we'll be creating 8 different variables of 8 different types to display our 8 different kinds of toasts. This is the base class from which they all derive. I'm creating a variable of that base class, calling createNotification as a method of that base class, and that hands me back a toastNotification object. Given that toastNotification object, I need to call the factory function toastNotificationManager.createToastNotifier. It has a show method. You give it the toast to be displayed, and it will display it on the screen. The reason this is so complicated is the screen only displays a certain number of toasts. And once one goes away, the next one fills in the most currently available slot. You'll see this happen as we try to display 8 different toasts. There's only a certain number of slots available. Somebody's got to manage where each of those toasts goes, and it has to manage the display and the look of each of those toasts. That's what the Toast Notification Manager does. These steps will be pretty much the same in all of your toast applications. Let's add code in our constructor to hook up the button clicks. Let's go get that. And this adds one line of code for each of our buttons. Of course, I probably need to compile the code so it stops complaining. There we go. For example, the click event of the first button calls a delegate, which ends up calling the display toast procedure, this one, passing in one of the 8 possible toast types. The library provides 8 values: toast template type.toasttext1, toasttext2, etc. So we're going to call this procedure passing in a different template type for each button that we click. And this procedure then will generate a different kind of toast depending on which button we click. Now, this is just a demonstration application. In real life, you'd create probably just one kind of toast. You wouldn't be trying to display all 8 different kinds of toast as part of one application, though, you might. So in any case, let's go add one single kind of toast code to our display toast procedure. Let me go get that. This would just display toast text 1. Let's remove that and replace it with my code. So here we go. If the template type you pass in is toast text 01, meaning you clicked the first button, then here's what we do. We create an instance of the iToastText01 type, which we get by calling the toast content factory, passing in the method we want to call, create toast text 01. I'm guessing you can figure out that this factory contains 8 different methods for creating 8 different types of toast. We get a reference to that toast, and then we set the various different bits of text for that type of toast. If you'll recall, you probably don't, but if you did recall, you'd remember that toast text 01 has one piece of text. It's called text body wrap. It's got a text property, and we can put whatever text we want in there. It could be long. Up to 3 lines of text would wrap. Then we take this specifically typed item of type iToastText1 and assign it into our base class variable, which we'll do for each of the 8 different types of toast, and assign that into that variable so we can then use that base class variable to finish up the code. Now, if we didn't want to have one piece of code here work for all different kinds of toast, we wouldn't have had to bother with this base class. We could have just called template content.create notification. And if I wanted to put this code here into each of the 8 different cases, I wouldn't have had to bother. If you don't believe me, try it. Instead of this one line of code, put this line of code into each one. And then you'll see you can get away with it. But then you're creating 8 different variables and it's a pain, so I tried to factor it out. All right, let's go get the rest of the code then. We don't need to examine all the rest of it quite as carefully, and there's a lot of it here, for each of the different 8 kinds of toast. There we are. So you can see we have an else-if clause for each of the other kinds. I'll just pick one at random. ToastText03 has a heading and a body. The heading can wrap in this case, so this text could be up to 2 lines that wrap in bold, and then 1 line that doesn't wrap. For the image cases, we can also supply, in addition to what we supplied before, we can supply a source for the image and alternate text for the image, so it will display as part of the toast. Let's save this and build it. So now our goal is just to see what all the different toasts look like. Later on, I'm going to show you the emulator that Microsoft provides with Visual Studio for testing applications, and it really is helpful when you have different screen layouts. One thing to note is, at least in the current version, the emulator doesn't display toasts. I spent another hour trying to get my code to work in the emulator because I never saw any toast, and it looked like it was supposed to work. But here on a real computer, if I click the button, I should see toasts, and I am not. I know why. Do you know why? I told you why this wasn't going to work. Darn it. Think about it a second. Why didn't we see any toasts? Well, you figured it out by now. I forgot to go into the appxmanifest file and turn on the capability to use toasts. Darn them. So down here somewhere should be toast capable. Set this to yes. Okay, let's try it again. Now if I click toast, it appears. Now you're wondering what that little X in the lower right-hand corner is? That X is the icon for my application. If I'd supplied a more interesting icon, you would see a more interesting icon there. This is the one with the heading that's bold and not bold text beneath. This is the one that doesn't have a heading. It's just got 3 lines of wrapping text. Here's the one with 1 line of bold text that might wrap and takes 2 lines on the screen and 1 line that doesn't wrap. Here's the last one, which is 1 line of bold text, 2 strings that don't wrap. Now notice what happens if I try to bring up multiples of these in succession. Only 3 appear at once. When 1 finally goes away, the 4th one appears. Did you catch that? I clicked the first 4 buttons in quick succession, but the 4th one didn't appear until the 3rd one had gone away. Now let's try the same thing with images. You'll see the dog, and the 4th dog one won't appear until the 1st one goes away and then the 4th one shows up. You've seen toast used in other applications, mail applications and other applications, and now you see how you can add your own to your own applications. Just don't fall for it like I did. Remember to turn on the capability of using toast within your application, or you'll never see the toast on the screen. These are the 8 built-in toast templates. You can modify the source code and add your own. You can modify the XML that's used to create the toast manually, and that's documented, if you want to change the layout. But you get these 8 for free, and for most situations that ought to work just fine.